Well, shall we get it going?
Yep, I'm ready when you are.
All right. Well, doing Black History Month. And when I started looking at Black history in Orleans County, it's been from almost the first settler on that we have had a Black community in Orleans County. But the Black History Month was started back in 1926. Carter G. Woodhouse, a Black historian, began the observance of Negro History Week, celebrated in February. Eventually, in the 1960s, students at colleges and universities began celebrating for a month, and the date was made official in 1976. February is the birth month for two prominent leaders who played an important part in Black history. This include President Abraham Lincoln, February 12th, and Frederick Douglass, February 14th. So it's significant that February is Black History Month. When I went through the records, this will give you an idea of Orleans County and how we started out. I couldn't verify any white or Black prior to the 1850 census. 1850 is when they started denoting whether somebody was Black or white. So 1850, there were 81 Blacks in Orleans County. 1860, there were 46. 1870, 113. 1880, 183. Then it goes down a little bit. 1900, there's 111. 1910, 116. And then it gets down to 88, 41. But then in 1940, there were 217. And in 1950, there were 539. So 1940, 1950. I was also looking at what kind of jobs did they do? Because people would say, oh yeah, well, they were servants and they were, they were household items. Well, no. One was a cook in a hotel. One was a farm laborer. One was a foundry worker. There was a washing woman, a domestic servant. But the domestic servant wasn't always Black. Sometimes the domestic servant was white. So that wasn't a category per se. One was a barber and his wife was a hairdresser. Right here in Albion for about 20 years. One was a blacksmith, one was a whitewasher, a bus driver, a washing and sewing, day laborer, teamster in a coal yard, a sailor, a washerwoman. That's in 1880. By 1900, there were 111, and they included a pianist, still a servant, a coachman, a musician, a butcher, a barber, carpenter, tinsmith, paper hanger, teamster, stone quarryman, carpet layer, and laundress, whitewasher, and an iron molder. So the jobs were not, quote unquote, what you would think for servants. They were independent people working a job. And that was interesting, I thought, when I looked at it, because they were really part of the community. They were really part of Orleans County. And also, there were churches that divided over the idea of abolition. The Congregational Church in Gaines split, and the Methodist Church here in Albion split, divided. That's why it's the first free Methodist, the first free Congregational. Now, the Methodist Church here had other issues also. It wasn't just a Black issue. But the Gaines Church listed in their founding for free Congregational. Believing slavery a sin of the blackest hue. Resolved that we will not fellowship as Christians with either the slaveholder or his apologist or supporter. Believing the making, handling, and use of alcoholic liquors as a beverage to be a sin, therefore. Resolved that we will not fellowship as Christians or support the office any who are engaged in this work of death. So that is the platform which the Congregationalists founded their church in Gaines. And I started looking at the people. Now there were 3 blacks very early on. One was Thomas McManners. Thomas McManners was a black man who lived during the Revolutionary War. He actually spent time with George Washington. In the list, we may include Thomas McManners, a colored man who, when a slave in the sunny South, ran away from his master and joined the Federal Army. I haven't traced yet who he might have come here with, but there were several Revolutionary War soldiers who settled in Clarendon. So it could be he came here with one of them. It says he had the air of truth about him that ever inspires the listener with the feeling that the narrator knows what he's telling to be correct. He was present with Washington during the awful days of Valley Forge and acted as a servant at his quarters. Those were the times that tried men's souls, as Thomas Paine wrote, when the soldiers could be tracked by the blood left behind, while the British were having plenty to eat, drink, and wear in their snug encampments in the then Tory city of New York. But this brave old soldier has laid down his knapsack, and long ere this has met many of his comrades in that country where men learn war no more. So that was what was written about Thomas McManners when he passed away, which I think is quite an honor. That's in Clarendon history.
Where was that written?
Pardon me?
Where was that written? D, where did you read?
That's in Clarendon, the history of Clarendon.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Then there's James Little. James Little was a man who came here with Joseph Hart.
That's my house.
That's your house? Yeah. Well, he was about 11. Joseph Hart had 4 sons, ranging from 11 to 5. He brought a black boy, James Little. The boy was a slave and was given Deacon Hart as part of his wife's dowry. So he was given James Little, his wife was, as part of her dowry when she got married. But when he moved here with the Harts made sure he was educated, sent him to school, and he was regarded as part of the family. And when he got older, James Little went on to Michigan. And why? Because Joseph Hart willed him 80 acres in Lansing, Michigan. So James Little went from being a slave to part of the Hart household to a major settler in Lansing, Michigan. And he lived in Lansing, Michigan, was honored all the time. If you read something about Lansing, you'll find something about James Little. When he passed away, he had 6 pallbearers, 3 black, 3 white. So you can see that tradition that began here. He kept it up. He was pleasant to work with. He didn't turn anyone away. And it showed when he passed away because both black and white were there at his funeral.
When did he come to Orleans County?
Probably, let's see, about 1812.
Yeah. I think Joseph Hart came around 1811.
Yeah.
1812.
Yeah, I think 1812 is what it figures out to be. So he was here right from the very beginning on. But then he was founder in Lansing, Michigan, which I think is rather cool also. And we talk about other people now we had Thomas McManners and we had James Little. We also have Richard Gordonier. He was a man who lived in Medina, was the son of Jacob Gordonier, a Mohawk Dutchman, and a colored woman, Gordonier's slave. Jacob Gordonier was a horse dealer and may have lost a great deal of money and finally died in Buffalo, a poor man. Richard's mother and himself were sold to Joseph Grant when Richard was only 2 months old. Joseph Grant was the father of L.A.G.B. Grant of Medina. Richard being 3 years old when L.A.G.B. Grant was born, it will be readily seen that on his last birthday, December 13th, 1889, he was 95 years of age. He was set free. His mother came here. They were slaves set free in New York State in 1825. So we're still talking the 1820s. He came to where Medina now stands in the year 1823 and cooked for Walton Grant's people on the farm south of Medina and lived with the Grants until 1824, after which time he worked on the Erie Canal for 15 years, or until 1839 when he settled permanently in Medina. Richard was a good cook, and a wedding party was never complete without him to do the baking for and waiting on guests. So he was the man you called when you had a wedding to make the food and serve the food. But it wasn't like that was a low thing. That was something people went to him because he was the best. And that was part of showing how good your wedding was, because you had Richard Gordonier catering it. That was a good thing. He was the only successful cartman here for many years, and there seemed no end to his call for whitewashing. He was also a whitewasher. So if you needed it done to your house, you called Richard. He was very successful in his business up to 1862 and had accumulated a nice property. But about that time, he was betrayed by a man he called his friend and lost everything he'd worked hard to accumulate. Since which time he's been engaged in whitewashing, smoking hams, baggage express. On December 11th, Richard will be 96 years of age. So he lived in Medina for a very long time, was part of their culture.
Did he end up at the almshouse?
Yes. Yes, he ended up at the almshouse, and he was buried in that cemetery. It also, Richard Gordonier was part of the Pioneer Association. There was a group that collected here that were people who were here very early, who helped to settle this county. And Richard Gordonier was included in the membership of that Pioneer Association. A.L. Bennett of Gaines came upon the platform. This is at one of the Pioneer Association meetings. And after calling Richard Gordonier and seating him beside the president, he told something of his own early life. He hired out to drive a team upon the canal when so small that it was difficult for him to climb unaided into the saddle. At his first stopping place, a man jumped off the boat and, taking him from the saddle, helped him unhitch the team and, with words of kindness and encouragement, gave him a shilling. That man, continued Mr. Bennett, who gave me my first shilling, who had only kind words of praise for the boy wearied with his long ride, was Richard Gordonier, my first friend and one never forgotten. There were tears in many eyes when the speaker concluded. So he even was praised at meetings for being part of the community. Richard Gordonier, pioneer over 98 years of age, he gave a brief but interesting talk also at one of the meetings. Mr. Gordonier in his boyhood, who was owned as a slave by a man living in Medina. Honorable H. Hutchinson of Gaines made some timely remarks in which he said that Mr. Gordonier's mother was once sold for 100 acres of land. Richard was part of the community. He was obviously listed in founding papers. He was respected. He worked on the canal. He was really part of the community. His mother was a slave to Jacob Gordonier. That's where he got his last name, was the slave owner, where he was born and raised. I think probably the thing that impressed me when I was researching Richard Gordonier is I started going through Medina papers just for the heck of it, doing Richard Gordonier. And he's mentioned in the newspaper all the time, what he was doing, where he was going. And this one, I don't know if you've seen it, but there was a picture of Richard Gordonier sitting in a chair with his legs crossed. I found out who took the picture. C.A. Stacy, S-T-A-C-E-Y. The artist has taken an excellent photograph of Richard Gordonier, and the latter is hoping to increase his wealth by selling copies thereof to his friends. So, you got a picture of yourself, and everybody knows who you are. Richard Gordonier is after the boys suspected of stealing his grapes with a sharp stick. They who leave the forbidden fruit alone will keep out of harm's way. Richard Gordonier showed us a few days since a curiosity in the shape of a chicken with 3 legs. He said it was the liveliest one of a brood of 23. This is all in the Medina paper. Richard Gordonier is after the boy suspected of stealing his grapes. I said that one. We are informed that our old friend Richard Gordonier met with a great loss on Wednesday night last in the death of his horse. Richard has always been a hard-working and industrious man. He's one of the old, if not the oldest, citizens of this village. The death of his horse is a great loss to him, as he is not able to purchase another. We understand that a petition is being circulated, and we hope our citizens will contribute liberally to help him purchase another horse. Richard Gordonier celebrated his 80th birthday on the 11th. He's the oldest colored man in this place or vicinity, and Medina has been his home for 58 years. That says quite a bit about how respected he was in the community. In researching this, a couple people have asked me, what about Frederick Douglass? Wasn't he here? Yes, he was here a couple times. He spent time here twice. In 1849, he was in Orleans County for about 3 weeks. He spoke at the Universalist Church in Clarendon on March 19th to a small but attentive audience, according to his account, on April 20th, 1849. He then spoke at South Berry at a schoolhouse on March 20th, then at Pine Hill and Berry the following day, then in Oakfield. Douglass expresses frustration in protracted church meetings that often didn't take up social issues of the day. He was back in South Berry on March 22nd and 23rd. He spoke in Albion on March 24th, then in Eagle Harbor on March 25th. This is Frederick Douglass. He went up to West Gaines the following day, but there had been no arrangements made for a meeting. On March 27th, 28th, he gave lectures in Johnson's Creek, first at the schoolhouse and then at the church. He spoke to small crowds in Lockport. He then went to Lindenville, the next 2 days, April 1st and 2nd. Douglas then spoke in Medina at the United Methodist Church on April 3rd in Gaines, West Gaines, April 5th in Albion and Eagle Harbor on April 2nd. He ended that speaking tour of Orleans County on April 8th, speaking to a large crowd at the Baptist Church in Holly. He really got around this county. Anybody who wanted to hear Frederick Douglass could have, because he was here every day for several months. Douglass was back in Orleans County in 1855, speaking at several locations, including West Kendall, Carlton, Two Bridges, Yates Center, County Line Corners, Shelby Center, Eagle Harbor, Gaines, Clarendon, and other spots. So we knew Frederick Douglass here in this county because he was a frequent visitor in a long time. What got me was how many days in a row he was here. Weeks.
No, I was saying, I wonder where he stayed, who was hosting.
Yeah, but probably, I would guess if he spoke at a church, maybe the minister of that church might have taken him in. So I'm sure there were people, since he was here for so long, and we have a background of integration from early on. I'm sure there were abolitionists all over this county, in every town. I think probably there was not that much against him. That's why he was here for so long. Somebody heard him speak and say, "Oh, can you come to our church on Sunday? Can you come? We have a meeting on Wednesday night." I think it snowballed once he was here. So we have a background of welcoming the black population, but not just to help us out, but to be citizens of this county. They started their own jobs. They were here. They were people like Richard Gordonier that people depended on. Thought he was a wonderful man. Had him doing all kinds of things. He's written up in the paper. So they followed what he was doing and what he needed. Another man in the county was Richard Hawkins, and I've spoken before about his son, Isaac Hawkins, who was in the Civil War, was captured, taken to Andersonville, and survived Andersonville, came back home, and then went back to Washington, and he's buried in Arlington Cemetery. And he grew up in Medina. One of a big family of Richard and Caroline Hawkins. Richard was a beer maker in 1850, and then he was a grocer in 1860. But he had Isaac, Marcine, Henry, Mary, Augustus, Alice, Charles, Walter, and William. That was the Hawkins family in Medina. And the thing that gets me is Isaac went to the Civil War, was captured, Andersonville, survived it, came home, went back again. But he also, Henry, Augustus, Charles, and Walter all went off to fight in the Civil War also. They ended up settling somewhere else. But 4 more of Richard Hawkins' family fought in the Civil War, which I think is rather cool. Then there's a man who was the first black man to be registered at the University of Rochester, and that is Henry Spencer. He grew up here in Albion. His family lived here. He was one of the pallbearers at Frederick Douglass's funeral. He was a member of the Frederick Douglass Memorial Committee and secretary of the New York State Assembly. He was, let's see here. Spencer's father came to Western New York with the local Union Army officers at the conclusion of the Civil War. The father, Henry Spencer, arrived in Orleans County with Lieutenant Hiram Sickles of the 17th New York Light Independence Artillery sometime around 1866, and then brought his wife and children to the area. Former county historian Matt Ballard wrote in a column published in 2020. One of Spencer's sons, Henry Austin, worked as an errand boy as a teenager and also attended local schools, but only for about 3 months out of the year. He would then attend a boarding school in Philadelphia and then the Brockport Normal School, where he graduated in 1880 as Gamma Sigma Orator, an honor that earned him full scholarship to the University of Rochester. This is a black kid from Albion. After the U of R, he studied law under the Honorable George H. Smith of Rochester. Spencer would then be appointed to a position in Albany in the speaker's room, thanks to a former University of Rochester classmate, James M.E. O'Grady. When S. Fred Nixon assumed the role of Speaker of the House in the Assembly, Spencer was appointed as Nixon's confidential clerk, a position which he continued to hold through the tenure of the Honorable James Wadsworth Jr. Upon his retirement in 1929, he had served in the government for over 30 years and worked for a period of time with Governor Alfred E. Smith and other prominent state officials. At the time of his death, September 25th, 1935, in Rochester, he was one of the area's most prominent African-American citizens. He was a past Grand Master of the New York State Colored Masons, an organization which consisted of over 2,000 members across New York State. And he was from here in Albion. I think that's quite a bit to be proud of. I'm trying to see if I've forgotten. He did so much. I could write a whole book on just him. He's listed in an advertisement, Attention Masons, new book of interest to you, Prince Hall and his followers. Comments are from Henry A. Spencer, Grand Master and Grand Commander of the Knights Templar of New York. So he really got up there as far as height in acknowledgement. One more? Two more. I'm getting more recent. We can all find stories like these about people who were before. But I think it's interesting to know, is it carried on? Do we have black people who we should be admiring in this county that we haven't done too much about? I think there's one. He was a Tuskegee Airman. His name was Wallace Higgins. He was from Kendall. He grew up in Kendall. He's in the official registry as a documented original Tuskegee Airman. He was in the first group. For his work with the Civil Air Patrol prior to his enlistment, he was a recipient of the Congressional Gold Medal. In May of 2015, Senator Kathy Young and state legislator inducted Higgins into the Veterans Hall of Fame in Albany. He was born November 11th, 1925, on a small farm in Kendall. Wally is the son of Alice and Daniel Higgins. Aside from his service, Wally is a loving father and dedicated family man who deserves our deepest respect and praise. It was an honor to be able to recognize him and have his story memorialized in state history, Young said. As soon as he turned 18 years old, Higgins enlisted in the U.S. Army Corps, having already been attending Civil War patrol classes in Rochester during his senior year in high school. He already had an interest in pursuing aviation. Let's see. Initially, he reported to Fort Dix, New Jersey. Higgins was then sent to Biloxi, Mississippi for basic training and aptitude testing. As a result of his skin color and proficiency, Wally was selected to be part of the Tuskegee Airmen experiment in Alabama, where he trained in pre-flight and primary flight training, including solo runs in a P-17 Stearman. Following 11 months at Tuskegee, a downturn in the war in Europe resulted in less pilot training, and Higgins was transferred to the 1909 Engineers Aviation Battalion, a sergeant in charge of all-black 30-man platoon. Mr. Higgins served in Saipan and Okinawa, building roads, airfields, and ammunition storage. On March 17, 1947, Wally was honorably discharged as a staff sergeant with Squadron F-3505, Army Air Force. For his service, Mr. Higgins earned the World War II Victory Medal, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, American Campaign Medal, Army Good Conduct Medal, New York State Medal for Merit. He was also recently presented with the Congressional Gold Medal due to his Civil Air Patrol involvement during the war. After the war, he followed his dream. He was accepted to the College of Ceramics at Alfred University and graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Ceramic Design in 1952. While student there, he met and married Norma Miller almost 64 years ago and never left Alfred. They raised 4 children, still reside now in Allegheny County, and 9 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. But I think the thing is, I wish I could find the quote. Maybe I can. Higgins in 2015 talked about encountering racial segregation and discrimination for the first time after entering the service, training in pre-flight at Tuskegee Institute. He didn't experience segregation or discrimination until he went to Tuskegee. It's amazing to me. I shook my head and read it again when I read it. But apparently, because he was black, he was immediately sent to the Tuskegee Airmen, which was an experimental group of black pilots. And the white pilots didn't welcome him in. And he said that's the first time he experienced segregation or discrimination, which means, thank you, Orleans County. He was born and raised here. He never experienced segregation or discrimination until he got to be in an all-black Air Corps. My mind still hasn't gotten over that one. He's also he was involved in flying Eleanor Roosevelt, convincing her to encourage to authorize military flight training at Tuskegee. So he got around, he knew people. The Tuskegee Institute was founded by Booker T. Washington, who spoke here at the Universalist Church at one point. This is what Higgins said about where he grew up. I didn't know about segregation growing up, said Higgins, a native of Kendall, who described a childhood living among German and other cultures on the shores of Lake Ontario. I just saw everyone the same. I think that says quite a bit about Orleans County and the towns here. So we have the Tuskegee Airmen, but now I'm going to bring us up to this year. Okay, Kendall, again, high school legend Roosevelt Bowie was recently honored by Syracuse University with the retirement of his uniform number 50. And now his hometown community and alma mater are set to add their congratulations to him for receiving this honor. Now this came in the last year or so. Well, come on here. Okay. Bowie, who would play 13 seasons in Italy, where he was considered a legend and was team captain for most of his career. Bowie came back to the United States after he retired from playing basketball to work with Opportunita, an organization developed to help small New York State communities establish business opportunities. So he was has been working within the community. And this is what I'd like to leave you with. Susan Oshman made it a mission 2 years ago to get new basketball courts at Bullard Park. Oshman rallied the community, including basketball legend Roosevelt Bowie of Kendall, in getting 2 new courts completed. They opened on October 26th last year. So you still have Black community members showing their support for this community and the community accepting them as part of it. I think it's amazing that even right up to today, we can say Black people are part of the integral part of Orleans County. They are accepted and they help to form this county and keep it running. And you can just go and look at the basketball court if you want. Because that's the most recent thing that's been done. Okay, anybody have any questions? I know that's a lot. Okay, well, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.